Florida Maquis, how can we take you seriously? Weren't you that channel that not so long ago was alleging that there had been perhaps giants and dragons in Antarctica based on visual evidence you had uncovered with Google Earth Pro? That seems pretty far-fetched, Florida Maquis. If 2020 and 2021 has taught us anything, we should always put our full faith in accepted science. They only have our best interest in mind, and they would never lie to us. They're the smartest people on the planet, aren't they? I mean, I guess it doesn't matter that you found 5 different distinct images of dragons, and 500 years ago, they were creating maps that showed giants and dragons. We need to put away all of that myth and legend and just continue to bow obediently at the altar of accepted science. That's what we have to do, Florida Maquis. We can't take you seriously unless you do that yourself. Well, in today's video, I'm going to reveal a few articles and some more evidence that shows accepted science might be moving a little bit closer toward what real history said occurred and not what they want to believe occurred. First example, quote, "It wasn't built to eat broccoli. Australia's largest dragon unveiled. A pterosaur fossil found in the outback a decade ago. The largest known flying reptile on the continent has finally been identified as a new species and is being compared to a dragon." Now, this is, of course, an artist's rendering of what it might have looked like. But it had no feathers. It had giant teeth. And it would have been an incredibly terrifying thing to see in the sky above you. Likely described as a dragon. 7-meter wingspan, almost 20 feet, 40 razor-sharp teeth, a circular crest below its jaw, and no living relatives. Now, this is Australia, a continent known to have been at one time connected directly to Antarctica. 12 days ago, flying dragon fossil found preserved inside a rock in the Chilean desert. Well, wait a minute, hold on. Now we have 2 different countries on entirely different sides of the globe describing things that they are finding in the fossil record as dragons in 2 locations very closely associated with Antarctica. Here's the actual image of what they found. What would you describe this as if you saw it flying in the sky above you? Scientists have identified the fossilized remains of a winged lizard unearthed in Chile's Atacama Desert. Pay attention to that. We're going to cover that later. As a flying dragon, the first of its kind to be discovered in the southern hemisphere. Something else to pay attention to. The pterosaur, the same thing found in Australia, which soared the skies 160 million years ago, had a wingspan of 6.5 feet, 2 meters. A little bit smaller. But once again, giant head full of bony teeth and wings without feathers. Now, here's where you've got to pay attention. They found the same thing in Antarctica, but watch how they describe it. 28 October 2020. Gigantic birds moved around Antarctica. And of course, here are the artist's rendering. More like albatrosses or seagulls, but listen to the exact description. Let's see if I can pronounce this properly. The Pelagornithidae were a family of early birds that had existed worldwide between 50 and 2.5 million years ago. The fossils found indicate that the pseudo-teeth-equipped giants have moved across the seas and may have hunted fish and squid in a warmer southern ocean. Now, these things, once again, fossil discovery, 5 to 6 meter, almost 20-foot wingspan with giant teeth. Flying creature with giant teeth in its head, huge bill. But of course, in Antarctica, they're birds. They're not dragons, they're birds. 3 distinct articles, and I'll give you the link to each of these articles, and you can see how differently they cover this exact same find in Antarctica versus Chile or Australia. Now, has science ever admitted it was wrong about something? They just did. And they bury this stuff way down at the bottom so that you don't read it. Most people don't read too far into articles. They find the thing that agrees with what they already want to believe, and they stop reading. Scientific team uncovers additional threat to Antarctica's floating ice shelves. Seems kind of boring, right? Well, when we scroll down, we read something that shouldn't occur in science. Quote, the prevailing theory behind the increase in large iceberg calving events, and I'm sure a lot of you have seen this, where these giant icebergs the size of U.S. states calve or separate away from the continent of Antarctica, in the Antarctic Peninsula has been hydrofracturing. What is that? In which melt pools, giant lakes, on the surface allow water to seep down through the cracks in the ice shelf, which expand when the water freezes again. Now, but that theory fails to explain how one of the biggest, iceberg A68, could break from the Larsen Sea ice shelf in the dead of the Antarctic winter when no melt pools were present. Literally, science is admitting in this article that our theory about how all this occurs was completely proven wrong. And we have no other real explanation for it, so we had to scramble to find this new explanation called melange, which is basically just a fancy word for slush. Every time they admit they're wrong, they bury it. Now, way back in the 16th century, map making was a very difficult thing to do. Finding parchment was hard, incredibly difficult. If you found it, you didn't waste it. On top of that, ink was very, very difficult to source. Once you had parchment and once you had ink, then you had to find somebody who was reliable. Maps were not just geographic information. They acted more like intelligence reports, meaning it wasn't just the lay of the land. It was what was going on in the region. So they left out some detail, specific detail, about the course of rivers to include things that were going on, because the people who commissioned maps were people who were interested in a larger worldview of the region. Now, dead center of your screen is a map that was created in the late 1600s. And what it shows, it's from South America, southern Argentina. It shows 2 men, one holding a skull, standing over the corpse of what looks like a giant that is twice as big as they are. This is artsandculture.google.com. I will share this with you and you can look at it for yourself. It shows things in South America that should not be there according to modern science. It shows the body of a giant lying in repose. It shows animals that we don't have any idea what kind of animals these are. But it also shows penguins. And incredibly, giant two-legged birds that look a lot like ostriches, but what do we know about Argentina? There are no ostriches in Argentina. Now, I want you to look really, really close at this image right here in the center that I'm circling. In fact, I'll zoom in even closer so you can see it. Now, I want you to put that image in your mind. This image was created by a map maker in the middle of the 1600s. Now let's go to Google Earth Pro. This was a find that I shared on YouTube 2 years ago. And I was largely laughed at for it. It shows virtually the exact same thing. Virtually the exact, identical, same thing. You got the skull, scapula, arms, legs crossed. It's a giant. It is the skeleton of a giant that has been uncovered by the massive amount of melting that has occurred in Antarctica. They're virtually identical. I don't know how you can explain this 400 years apart. Now, are you ready to laugh? Are you ready to have a huge belly laugh? This is what science is telling us actually happened regarding the giant megacontinent known as Pangaea from 200 million years ago, talking about the birth of Antarctica. I'm going to play this forward and speed it up just a little bit. They're trying to allege that they know exactly how the continents broke up. Now, you see this part right here where I'm circling? This is Antarctica. 185 million years ago. Huge jungle, totally green, full of life. Now, as the clock begins to wind down in the lower left, you'll see the continents, as you recognize them now, to start to separate. Here's Antarctica. This is Australia. Here goes Africa up here. South America way over here. India becomes an island somehow magically, and then not an island again. Asia. The most hilarious part of this is that it shows Australia separating from Antarctica, but Antarctica stays perfectly stationary through this entire explanation. Why? Why would Antarctica stay right where it is and every other continent move away from it? Here's where things get really hilarious. Antarctica begins to freeze, but Australia, just a few hundred miles away, still balmy, still tropical. This becomes this giant, wintry, frozen nightmare, but over here a desert. This is what accepted science wants you to believe actually happened. It's ridiculous. It's the most ridiculous thing I've ever seen in my life. Because when you scroll out and you look at Antarctica, there are other science articles that talk about the land bridge that used to be between South America and the Antarctic Peninsula. But that explanation I just showed you from Accepted Science shows that there was no land bridge. You can literally see from space that there was clearly a a land bridge that was here and some gigantic, catastrophic oceanic event poured a ton of water between these two areas. And you can see, it literally looks like a giant thumb came down and scraped the two areas apart. But of course, their visual explanation doesn't account for this. It shows the eastern side of West Antarctica made it up to the western side of Chile and just scraping its way along. It's just ridiculous. And I don't think it's completely divorced in reality to say that what we've seen from 2020 and 2021 and that ridiculous notion of what's happened in the last year and a half in society is anything different than what we've heard about, quote unquote, the evolution of the planet. It's the same B- and C+ students grasping at straws, trying to make you believe because they want you to believe they're the smartest kids on the planet, that you just need to believe them and never question them. The Atacama Desert, they allege, was this high, arid plain all the way back when the video I just showed you revealed it to be a lush rainforest. Atacama, oldest desert on Earth and has experienced semi-arid conditions for roughly the past 150 million years. Wait a minute, that's not what this video shows. This is 160 million years ago. It's still showing it to be a rainforest. So once again, here is science arguing with itself. It's just absolutely nuts. And once again, I've done 328 videos covering this. And I have a playlist. So the next time somebody says, oh, Florida Maquis, he talks about crazy Antarctica, dragons and giants, maybe scratch your head and think, well, they also told us what the cure for the 2020 sniffles was, didn't they? Except it's science. And I'll leave it there. God bless. Like, share, subscribe, and we'll see you guys next time.